Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Supercoach, mates. Well, round 13 is done and dusted, which means we're almost out of the bye periods. Um, so pretty much because we're almost at the end of the season, there's probably not really a lot of a lot of main things to talk about. But we are still going to find some avoid and trades, and of course, everyone's favourite segment, which is my rant, is still going to make an appearance. So before we get into the questions, we're just going to quickly touch on how we went over the weekend. So since I've got my side up on the screen in front of me now, I'm going to do mine first. So I scored 2,086, which I thought was a very respectable score, given that I think I only had about 19 plays to pick from. So obviously, I guess I'll go through a couple of plays. So Rory Laird really helped with his 156, and Josh Dunkley as well, and Taranto and Jack McRae, which is someone who I think a lot of people were flirting up a couple of weeks ago when he got that forward eligibility, whether or not to trade in, and I'm glad I went down that path. In terms of trades this week, well, I had planned to get in Jack Sinclair, and then James Sicily decided to go and tackle someone to the ground and get himself rubbed out for 3 weeks. So at this stage, I'm not really sure what I want to do. Ideally, I'd love to keep Sicily because I know that his scoring is so much better than pretty much any other defender outside of Dacos and Stewart and Dawson, who I've got all three of them already. So if I can try and get rid of Wilmot and Atkins, I think I will this week, but I'm not really set in stone. How about yourself, Thomas? How did you go last week?
This was my strongest week for the bye rounds. Luckily, obviously, didn't have Stewart as a common player who was out. Scored, let me just bring it up real quick. 2,207, so top 1%, which was one of my highest scores for the season. In comparison to how everyone else went, which was positive, I think I was looking a lot higher. I basically killed myself 50 points because I ended up going Brayshaw instead of Laird as a captaincy option, but overall pretty strong. This week, looking a bit touch and go. I should have, I think I've just got 18 without Sicily. We'll obviously talk about Sicily's suspension in the upcoming minutes, really. But he's a big talking point because he's out for 3 weeks. I know that Hawthorn have just, as at the time of recording, have decided to appeal the decision, but because of their bye around this weekend, they make the appeal Monday. So unfortunately, he'll miss this week regardless. Well, obviously he's missing this week, but it seems a bit unfortunate for Supercoach is that essentially you'll have to wait until Monday and essentially miss a week's round of scoring to be able to make a decision. But other than that, pretty good so far. Brought in Fife and who else did I bring? Yeah, Brayshaw and Fife and Neil. All scored respectively well. And was pretty happy with the trade-ins and pretty close to a full team. We've got obviously Waddell on the bench still, or Waddell as a playing defender when it's out of buys. Have the luxury of having Sean Darcy and Kieran Briggs. So, yeah, I've got cash in the bank to make those last swap trades. I'll probably end up having to rotate Humphrey and Fife to start with at the F6 position for now until I'm able to facilitate the trades elsewhere. But yeah, looking all right and hopefully score a decent score this weekend, considering I should have enough players on the track. Even if I do decide to trade Sicily to whoever I might be, I definitely have enough players. But we'll move on to our agenda for this week. So the first one we have off the rank is obviously that Sicily incident, which I'm interested to see your thoughts, Nathan, not just from a Supercoach perspective, but of the 3 weeks as well that was given down to him, with Hawthorn potentially going to appeal the decision. From a Supercoach perspective, before you go on to the actual decision itself, what are your thoughts on First of all, I believe you're an owner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
I've actually had him since round 1.
yeah. I think you were one of the only one out of us three that had him since round 1. Yeah. What are your thoughts on obviously holding him throughout the bye rounds, giving a perspective of both league players and overall players, or just shipping him off now? He's at a very good price considering his two very good back-to-back scores, with the potential to pick him up later in the season once his essential 4-round match ban, if it gets upheld with the 1 week bye. Or does this news change overall, considering that Hawthorn are going to appeal that decision and it's going to be on a Monday?
Yeah, so obviously I've only just got home, so I didn't know the Hawthorn have appealed that decision. I'm actually tempted to hold him regardless because I don't know who you're going to replace him with that can score as consistently high as Sicily. And I think if I trade him out, I know that at some stage you're going to want to get him back in because he's a top 6 defender. There's no doubt about it. And I think the captaincy has really helped calm down. When he was younger, he used to be a bit of a hothead on the field, but I think this year he sort of matured a little bit. And I think he's really taking a great amount of pride in leading these Hawthorn sort of rebuild and the stage they're in. So I actually think the bigger loss is actually going to be from Hawthorn as a side as opposed to Supercoach, because we saw in the one game where he didn't play. Now, admittedly, it was against Port Adelaide in Adelaide, but they conceded 100 points and a half of football. So not having him down there, I think I was almost tempted. I know they play Carlton in a couple of weeks, and based on current form, I was almost tempted to give them a win. But I feel like that now that he's not there, I feel like that tip's probably going to go back towards Carlton. But yeah, I will try my best to hold him because I don't know who to replace him with. I would rather use a Wilmot to get up to Sinclair or Dan Houston, which I think will be my final 2 defenders. And I think if Chincotta can stay in the Carlton side, which I'm not optimistic about, if he can just stay in there for another couple of weeks and let Sicily get through his suspension or potential getting off, I'm happy just to cop a 60 and know that Sicily's going to be back in there. So I'm leaning towards the hold for Sicily. How about yourself, Thomas?
It's an interesting one because it doesn't help that he automatically misses this week because of his bias. We're essentially looking at 4 weeks if he does get his ban upheld. Yeah, I would be surprised if he gets mitigated to 2 weeks thereafter instead of the 3. But they seem pretty confident that they might win something here if they're appealing it. I mean, it was a pretty surprising decision nonetheless for the 3 weeks, but looking at trades, it doesn't help. I've got 6 trades left, which leaves me pretty thin looking forward. I've got, if I just do the maths correctly, I'm pretty sure I've got 2 upgrades left with the rotation of Fife and Humphrey. So it makes it a bit of a delicate position to be in. Oh, sorry, not Humphrey. What do I got? So Dacos comes on. So yeah, I've got one upgrade in defence essentially, and then with regards to my midfield, I've got a choice of essentially bringing a midfield or forward player on, probably a midfielder, and having that rotation with Humphrey and Fife. So it makes it hard for me because it's one of those situations where you burn the Sicily trade, that's one already down, and it makes it even harder to finalise that upgrade from a Fife and a Humphrey. Having said that, the one thing that I'm considering as well is to downgrade Sicily to another midfielder or a defender, probably a Stewart, and use that money or the 60k extra to upgrade Waddell, who's on his buy anyway, to a Himmelberg, and basically play Himmelberg as a D6, and then either not have Sicily for the rest of the season and have a Stewart instead, or if I have that upgrade, essentially is a Will Day, who will be my F6, or Will Day / Himmelberg, whoever's performing the worst, to back to a Sicily as a luxury upgrade. So yeah, it's a tough decision because obviously if I'm able to get, I'm definitely able to get a Sicily to Stewart and then a Waddell to a Himmelberg, which finishes my back line and then essentially enables me to only have that rotation of Humphrey and Fife. That's obviously with Sheasel on the side as well. So yeah, it's a tough one to decide on because that next round bye is what kills it, because Himmelberg only has that 1 week before his bye. Having said that, if I'm able to do that trade, I might do it. To enable an extra player on the field this week. But yeah, it's a tough one. I'm slightly leaning towards trade just because, 4 weeks is a long time, especially if that span is upheld. It's essentially like a hamstring injury. But I would say trade in the sense that I'm able to upgrade Waddell as well to a playing player. I would suggest if you're low on trades and you're only sideways, you get to a Stewart or to another midfielder, probably avoid it unless you're gunning for overall. But if you're able to facilitate a rookie up to a mid price, or if you have enough money and you only need a 60k extra to make that transfer premium for a rookie, then go for it. I think if you're able to still facilitate that upgrade and downgrade cycle, it's pretty valuable. Move on to the next point of discussion, which is obviously the trading options. So moving on to what I'm talking about, it'd be interesting to hear your opinion, Nathan, on what I've just talked about. Himmelberg, I know that not Hinkley, who's the coach from
Kingsley,
GWS.
Adam Kingsley.
Kingsley, he's basically stated that Himmelberg will play defence. They trialled him up forward, but they're pretty happy with him playing that seventh defender role, which he did well last season and ended up being a premium essentially. Scored, I think, 88 on the weekend, but none of the GWS defenders scored well, and he was the highest one. So you can kind of see that he scores generally well in that position, takes kickouts as well. And Stewart being another one that comes off his bye, plays tomorrow night, so it makes it hard if you want to trade early. I mean, if you want to bring him in for Sicily, you have to make that trade early. What are your thoughts on bringing these players in? One, I'll give you two questions, really. One, would you be happy just to sideways a Sicily to Stewart, or do you think that's a bit of a waste? Go down my route, which is essentially, trading out a Sicily to a Stewart, bank that 60k, use that to facilitate a Himmelberg trade, or do you think Himmelberg is worth the 1 week now, or do you rather wait until his bye? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if you're going to go down the Himmelberg path, I think it's got to be this week because his break-even's 26 and they're playing against Fremantle. So, I think if you're going to do the Himmelberg option, I think you can safely say it's got to be this week. Now, with using Sicily, this is the option that I'm actually looking at potentially as well, even though I've said I'm holding, is going down to Sinclair with Sicily and then using the money from Weddle or Wilmot to go up to Himmelberg, which is only about a 60k jump.
Yeah.
Because if Adam Kingsley has come out and said that he's playing down back, well, his scoring just goes through the roof because they love the ball in his hands. He's a great kick. I guess the only question is because he's played forward in the past, there's always that option that if they feel like they need a score, they're going to swing him forward. So I think the safer option is just to do the sideways to Stewart or to Dawson or Nick Dacos. But if you're strapped, especially for cash, I think sideways into someone like that and then using the money to get in Himmelberg, I don't think is the worst option you could do.
Yeah, I mean, I personally agree. I think if you're able to get to 18 for that round, obviously if you're really struggling for numbers, then you probably think twice about bringing Himmelberg in just for the weight. But if you can get to 18 when everyone is still struggling, I think he's worthwhile to have an extra body on field this week. But we'll move on swiftly to the next point of discussion, which is the trading options that are not Geelong players or Himmelberg. Two popular midfield options with, I know a lot of people. I know one of our followers on Instagram, sent us a DM with regards to midfield options. I know you mentioned Brad Crouch from St Kilda, but two options which one is dipped in price in Noah Anderson. I know Jonas is unfortunately sick tonight. Had a bit of a man crush on him, bringing him in about 600k and he's now dipped 50k. But what are your thoughts on bringing in either of these midfield options if you're looking for an option? Noah Anderson and Real, who are obviously both capable of scoring big numbers and are coming off their bye.
Yeah, so I'm just having a look now, and I would possibly wait if you can, because Carlton seem to have a good record this year of negating midfielders from the opposition. So, and also they play on the MCG, which I don't really think is going to suit the Gold Coast contested and clearance style that they play. So I would possibly try and avoid both of them and see how they go. I'm trying to get up Anderson's break even, but it's not working for me. But Matt Rouse,
111 is break even, and Rouse break even is about 80 odd.
Yeah, so even if they go gangbusters, you're not really missing out on a much. But if you had to make me pick, I would probably pick Anderson, and that's purely because he's 40k cheaper than Rail, and I think they're both going to probably score about the same.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Anderson had a few off weeks. He bounced back prior to his bye with a 120. I mean, Rail has a potential to go 160 plus, so does Anderson. I don't think there's much difference in there, but essentially what you're doing is you're buying one on a low or you're buying one on a high, and I think Anderson is 550k. He's fully capable of scoring as well as Rail, if not better, as shown previously.
Well, they're actually just to interrupt. Sorry, they're actually next to each other in the overall ranking. So Noah Anderson's the 24th ranked player this year, and Matt Rouse only scored 14 less points. So, yeah, I would definitely be leaning towards Anderson just based off that.
Yeah, I agree. Moving on to the next one. Obviously this is more maybe you're in your boat, Nathan. If you're looking to hold Sicily and looking to still use an upgrade cycle and getting another premium through, one down, one up, in your case, Wilmot and Waddell, which is pretty popular with most. I mean, Van Rooyen as well is peaked in price. But two potential rookies is very, very slim pickings. I know the Oyster Mullen kid from Geelong isn't playing. I think he's got an adductor strain or something like that, so he's missing this week. But two that are pretty genuine options is Lewis Melican and Angus Sheldrick. I know that Melican, watching this game pretty closely because obviously Saints played the Swans last Thursday night. Melican was disappointing for the fact that usually defenders score very well against the Saints. I don't know if that's something that's now changed with Ross Lyon having to tinker with the game plan a little bit, considering that we were getting mauled a little bit in the last couple of weeks before the bye. But Melican came off an 87 and a 52, and Sheldrick, he started as a sub a couple of times and hasn't had a few poor scores, so hasn't risen drastically in price, but was very, very impressive in my opinion. I don't know what score he
got. 61.
Yeah, 61, but it wasn't necessarily his scoring, it was the way he was playing, looked really dominant in the midfield for someone who was thrown in there because Parker essentially wasn't there. Having said that, Parker probably comes back this week. What are your thoughts on any of these two as a genuine downgrade option? Obviously not because you're trying to save the cash, but someone that might be getting on the park as an extra player on field, but able you to facilitate that trade up to, I don't know, Brayshaw or Sarong or something like that, if you need a premium somewhere.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly, just before I do this, I just want to quickly run back over an old pet hate of mine, and that is trading in players who haven't been named for their third game. So if you've traded in that Geelong bloke, I know he's only 102k, but if you've downgraded him hoping for him to play, you are now in a world of pain because I don't think he's going to get back in Geelong's side. So effectively, you've got a dead rookie on the field or in your side who you can't do anything with because I'm pretty sure he's defence only eligibility. So that's exactly the risk that you run if you choose to bring in someone who has only played 2 games but hasn't been named for their third game. because now effectively you've got a dead rookie, and that might come to bite you because he's 102k. So you're either upgrading him, which you don't want to be doing, or you're sidewaysing him, which you don't really want to be doing that either. So, right, moving on to the thing here. I'm going to keep this very simple. I think if you're going to pick between these two, I think Malikan is the far safer option. I don't know when the McCartan brothers are back, but I think as long as they stay out and Malikan keeps up his scoring, I think he will hold. And I think, unfortunately for Angus, I think he will be first cab off the rank when Parker comes back. So I think this is very easily going to be Lewis Malikan for mine.
Yeah, I agree. I think with the lack of tools they have, I know Mills at times played as a tool, and it wasn't really working for the Swans. I mean, Malikan played okay. Sheldrick at times actually looked like Parker. It's quite funny watching him play. He plays a lot like Parker in the fact he's a nuggety midfielder who is an in and under player, can get the ball. However, I don't think both of them work too well in the midfield, considering the Swans got beaten by us, who are pretty shoddy midfield at the best of times in regards to our players coming back and all that. So, yeah, Sheldrick, whilst he scored well, I don't think he's consistent enough. If you picked him up at a bargain based on price, different story. But considering only 10k difference, I think Malikan's about 170k. Job consistency-wise, a lot stronger, and he probably has that ceiling as well, but Sheldrick doesn't, and he's got that base ceiling as well that Sheldrick could completely bomb out and get subbed out as well. So, yeah, moving on, I think, to the second last one before we get on to one of the hot topics of the AFL this week, but captaincy and vice captaincy options. So I'll leave this open to you, Nathan, if you want to include any other options that are viable. But what are your thoughts on particularly these two and anyone else you think that are worthwhile? They're saying obviously the Dogs are playing North in a game that historically the Dogs usually feast on, regardless of how hard North try. And then VC see Dunkley as well, who's had a ripper season so far and plays the Swans who, traditionally don't really tag him, or maybe Mills goes to him, who knows. But what are your thoughts on the captaincy and vice captaincy options for this week in particular?
Yeah, so I'm just looking through tomorrow night, and I actually have a bit of a left field one here, and I'm actually tempted to chuck it on someone from tomorrow night's game. I do have a couple of Port Adelaide or Geelong players. The one I would chuck it on is Zach Butters, because I think he's just in another league of his own at the minute. I think, he's leading the coach's vote, another perfect 10. And I think he's making a very, very underrated charge to the Brownlow medal, because everyone's focusing on Nick Dacos. So I think if I had Butters, I think he'd be the one I put the VC on, but I don't have him. So I don't mind the two that I've got, which is Connor Rosie or Tom Stewart. I think I would probably lean towards Rosie, because I feel like that his speed through the midfield could trouble Geelong. But I wouldn't be doing it on Bond, because he plays in the last game of the round. So if you're putting the vice captain on Bond, you're probably not doing the loophole right. But he will definitely be my captain, or my second choice, if you will. But it's just a matter of who I choose to put on. I don't mind Dunkley as a vice captain either. I think he'd be the one out of all the Brisbane players, which I'll get to in a second about why I'm not going to put it on Lockie Neal. But yeah, I think it would probably be one of those first two games, and I'm probably going to lean towards someone from tomorrow night. But if not, it will definitely be Dunkley.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's a solid option. You would be pretty confident, I think, at least with the VC option on the Port boys. Port are flying at the moment, and the Geelong boys don't seem to go overly well in the midfield, and a team like Port could really beat up on them around the ground. I know Danger's back, but he's one that I think they might have rushed in a little bit to see if they can combat the guys like Ollie Wines and things like that. So it's a bit of a tough one, but yeah, pretty smart decision going early with. I don't think there's only two other games that I'd be pretty confident with.
GWS Freo, Richmond
Yeah,
midfielder, Carlton Gold Coast.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, the Carlton Gold Coast one's probably too late if you've got Cripps and Walsh and any Chera as well.
I wouldn't
The
be. Cher's
Saints,
the only one
yeah,
I'd be interested in doing.
yeah. Even then, you'd be having to watch the clock, I think, because you'd be pretty confident with, the Bont being the captaincy, safe captaincy option 440 on Sunday. But yeah, the Tigers and the Saints. If it wasn't for Steele's dodgy knee at the moment, I'd be going Steele, I think, as a VC, considering that Richmond don't really tag, so he's pretty good. But yeah, it's a tough one. But yeah, we'll see how we go. But I think Butters or Rosie, who've got him, is a pretty consistent option. I think Bont's just an automatic captaincy option as much as North want to try and tag him. I don't think they would be able to physically. Yeah, moving on to the last discussion before we let Nathan off the hook a little bit. This one, obviously, with the tribunal decisions, which caused a fair bit of uproar on social media. We've obviously spoken at length of Sicily's decision with regards to Supercoach. I guess Nathan can touch on a bit about the decision here. But what are your thoughts on the tribunal decisions and the kind of decisions they're making in general, based on what you've seen from these tackles and whatnot? Obviously, Sicily's one was probably arguably up there with Mansell's one. But yeah, Butler got off from the 1 week suspension. What are your thoughts on these ones? Do you reckon it's a bit of a fair ruling, or you think it's just completely gone out of hand now?
Well, I don't know how many of you guys watch sort of the review podcasts and whatnot, but last week there was a memo that was sent to AFL clubs about how to tackle properly, and pretty much half the clubs didn't watch the video. And their reason for not watching the video is because the clubs feel like that it's a lottery at the minute when it comes to tackling and whatnot, which I think that is the fair assessment at the minute, that no one knows what's going on with the tackling, because you can have two identical tackles, and if someone gets concussed, or then they go to the tribunal and they get 3 weeks, and if they don't get concussed and they get up and they keep playing, then the tackle doesn't even get looked at, and in fact it probably gets applauded. So right now I think what they're doing is correct, but I think it's just a matter of getting the players used to this idea that the way that they've perhaps been taught to tackle, which is pin the arms and slam them into the ground, it doesn't really conform with what the AFL are trying to do, which is protecting the head. But in saying that, rather than judging it on the outcome, which seems to be what's happening, I think they should judge it on the action, and they need to be penalising the action rather than the outcome, which is what seems to be going on with a lot of these. They had a biomechanist on last night. So if you don't know who they are, basically a biomechanist is a sports person, and they specialise in movement in sport. And Hawthorn used this as evidence, and the biomechanist basically said that as soon as Brockman got involved in that contest with Sicily, that Sicily basically had no control of where McCluggage was going to land. And I think that's the most surprising thing about the tribunal decision, was that they allowed that. She had her opinion on it, and they still didn't agree with what she said. So right now, I think that all I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to Damien Barrett, which is that I think the whole system at the minute is a complete and utter mess. And I think that the first job of whoever takes over from Brad Scott as football boss is to get in there and work out how they can use this tribunal appeals and MRO system going forward. Because right now, I think it's just confusing players, confusing fans about what constitutes a great tackle and what constitutes a dangerous tackle, when you've basically got I'll use you, and you can't possibly tell me that any of those tackles are worse than what Kasiah Pickett did in round one. And the only reason he didn't get more than what he did was because Bailey Smith got up and played on in that round one game. So that's where I think there's the mass confusion at the minute, is that they're judging these decisions on the outcome of the incident rather than the action of the incident. And until that changes, I still think that we're going to be in a whole lot of confusion until someone from the AFL comes out and tells everyone that this is what constitutes a safe tackle and this is what constitutes a dangerous tackle. And yeah, I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if it's a case of the umpires blowing the whistle earlier. I don't know if it's a case of penalising um, players for not letting the ball out. And I think the players themselves can actually have a bit to do with this, because some players might take advantage of this and decide to try and deliberately play for free kicks, which I think that that's actually a greater threat right now than these sling tackles, because if you've got players that are deliberately going out to try and get themselves hurt by essentially flopping on the ground, well, I know they won't have the legal framework to do it, but I would love the AFL to come out and find someone or even suspend someone for deliberately trying to not protect themselves from being flung into the ground, as opposed to suspending the tackler for doing their action. So that's where I sit on that. So if you're going to ask me the question now, I think these particular suspensions, in the context of what the AFL are trying to do, I think they're fair, but they're seriously flawed, because there's other similar actions that are not being punished because of the outcome of the incident.
Yeah, no, I think I 100% agree with you. I think they're definitely focusing too much on I know they were saying that they were going to outlaw, look at the action rather than the consequence, but now they're going too much into that consequence, and it's a bit hit and miss with what constitutes as a fair tackle. You look at Butler's one, he was applauded for the tackle, however, it was called a dangerous tackle, and Sicily's one even got called holding the ball. So I don't see how you can come to a fair decision if you've got umpires saying it's holding the ball and then you're getting done for 3 weeks. I don't know what message that sends to anyone when there's inconsistencies with the result of an umpiring decision compared to the actual result of a tribunal. So it's very, very, very different scenarios. I know Mansell's one was a bit different because he went to bump and just got him higher. So I think that one was very similar to Goey's case there. But I also agree with what you said with regards to players now kind of exploiting that to some degree. I know on the Saints TV podcast they mentioned about Nathan Murphy from Collingwood getting tackled and then not actually using, whether or not he knew or not, but not using, I think, with the left hand or something to actually break his fall a little bit. So
and
whether or not players
one. Yeah, there was a Lockie Neal one a few weeks ago.
Yeah, the flop of the head and stuff like that. So whether or not players are starting to smart on it, footy players are pretty smart to these rules. They'll figure out ways to exploit it and get an advantage, considering how hard it is to win free ball. With how the nature of footy is, so any chance they have an opportunity to win a free kick, they'll pounce on it. And unfortunately, with the problem with these rules, it is quite concerning with how it's going. But on to a bright note, we'll let Nathan rip loose to a bigger issue, and we'll see how angry he gets by the end of the next 5 minutes.
Right, now, I have a bone to pick here, and I'm leaning your way, Mr. Errol Gordon from the Sydney Swans. So, you, on Friday night last week, or Thursday night, whenever it was, played against St Kilda, and St Kilda haven't been going that well recently. They've sort of, I think they sort of were a bit like a Collingwood. I think they sort of fell into their bye a little bit, but to only score 62 points when we need you to be scoring more than that, especially because we've only got 18 players on the top 18 scores at the minute, is not good enough. He's not good enough. 16 disposals last week. You can't possibly tell me that there was any more pressure on you as opposed to any other game. Now, I know that they had someone on the radio and they revealed that the Sydney cricket ground grass was cut longer, which allowed the ball to get a bit more wet. But that still doesn't explain how you only managed to score 62 against St Kilda. And this is now your third score under 100 in a row. And I think when we picked you at the start of the year, after you went ballistic in the preseason, I think most people thought that you would be a keeper. But to only score 62 is not good enough, Els. So you might look good on the field. You might have a fancy left boot. But if you're not using it properly, mate, you will be out of my side quicker than you can yell finals at the minute for Sydney. And my other rant is the Brisbane Lions. Now, up until this last week, and I still am, I've been a big believer of the Brisbane Lions. In fact, I went as far as saying that I think that they are Collingwood's greatest threat in the AFL right now. And if you look at champion data, they would probably agree with that statement that it's probably Collingwood and Melbourne and then Port Adelaide are the next best ones. But right now, I think Brisbane, outside of perhaps Adelaide, are the biggest flat track bullies in the AFL. And to be a flat track bully as a top four side is not a good place to be because as soon as finals come around, all right, you're probably not going to finish second now because I think you're too far behind. But if you finish fourth and Collingwood finish first, there is no way on earth that anyone in their right mind could possibly have any faith in Brisbane beating Collingwood on the MCG in the first week of the finals. So I know publicly they won't come out and say that there's an issue at the MCG, but clearly when they've only won one game from their last 14 at the MCG, and that was against a banged up Melbourne side in the final, when Christian Petrarca was basically playing at full forward on one leg. And even then, it only took until the second half to really get on top of them. I think that there's massive problems with Brisbane away from home. And up until last week, I had faith. I'm like, no, they're going to come good. You know, this is their year. But last week against Hawthorn really has dented any confidence that I have in Brisbane winning the premiership. I don't think that they can win it now. And I think their best result now is to make a grand final and hope that Collingwood and Melbourne slip up. Because I don't think that they're going to be beating Collingwood or Melbourne on the MCG on grand final day. So to the Brisbane Lions, you guys need to have a massive think about how you're coming down to Melbourne because there is clearly something mentally going on there with how you want to play on the MCG because whatever you're doing is not working. And up until last week, Hawthorn, I think a lot of people thought were perhaps the best of those bottom three sides, but last week they made you guys look like a bottom four side. So to the Brisbane Lions, you guys need to get over this mantra of being flat track bullies and actually get some wins, decent wins on the road and especially on the MCG because you've only got one more chance and that's against Melbourne. I think it's round 16. And that's it. You won't be back on the MCG again till finals. And if you lose that game against Melbourne, that is not going to be a good omen come finals time when you are going to have to play on that ground and you're probably going to have to get through an MCG side to make it into the grand final. So, yeah, that is my rant done. I need to go and rest my voice.
Fair cop, yeah. I don't think the Lions fancy themselves anywhere outside Brisbane. But yeah, anyway, other than that, we will let Nathan rest his voice and hopefully he comes back with another bang next week. Yeah. But anyway, we'll catch you next week. And yeah, good luck for the second round of buys. Hopefully you've got a few players back and don't look like you're struggling for 18. I know the buys are a tough 4-week period, especially now it's stretched over 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks. But hopefully you get lucky and don't have a Sicily and any other suspended players, and hopefully get a decent score this week. And good luck for your teams playing on the weekend, and then we'll catch you next week.